Morning light filtered through latticed windows into corridors of polished marble and woven carpets. Inside the imperial harem of the Ottoman palace, the day began not with indulgence but with order. Footsteps moved in disciplined silence. Lessons awaited. Prayers would be recited. Lives, carefully regulated, unfolded according to rules as strict as any military code. This was not a place of leisure. It was an institution of power. The Ottoman imperial harem functioned as a central pillar of the state. It stood adjacent to the Sultan's private chambers not for intimacy alone, but for politics. Succession, legitimacy, and dynastic continuity flowed through its walls. The women inside were not ornaments. They were participants in an imperial system that linked reproduction directly to governance. Most concubines entered the harem young, drawn from diverse regions of the empire and beyond. Upon arrival, their previous identities ended. Names changed. Languages shifted. What followed was education. They learned Ottoman Turkish, Quranic recitation, court etiquette, music, embroidery, and administration. Literacy mattered. So did composure. Advancement depended on discipline and obedience, not affection. Records from the palace emphasized training schedules, hierarchical ranks, and supervision, evidence of a structured bureaucracy, not a private household. Religion shaped daily life. Conversion to Islam marked formal entry into the imperial order. Prayer regulated time. Morality governed behavior. Every gesture carried meaning. In a system where proximity to the Sultan equaled political relevance, self-control became survival. A concubine who demonstrated intelligence, restraint, and loyalty could rise. Some would become mothers of princes. A few would shape imperial policy indirectly, through sons who ascended the throne. Status existed, but it remained conditional. Rank within the harem determined clothing, living quarters, and access. Eunuchs enforced boundaries. Senior women supervised juniors. Surveillance was constant and normalized. Favor brought protection, yet never certainty. A woman visible today could vanish tomorrow, reassigned or forgotten without explanation. Crucially, concubines were not private possessions. Under Ottoman law, they belonged to the Sultan as culs, servants of the state. This distinction mattered. Their bodies, futures, and offspring were bound to imperial interests. Personal desire carried no legal weight. Marriage, when permitted, followed political logic. Motherhood offered influence but also danger. A prince's rise elevated his mother. His fall destroyed her. From the outside, the harem appeared secure. It was guarded, provisioned, and insulated from the chaos of the city beyond palace walls. For many women, it offered stability unavailable elsewhere in the empire. Food was guaranteed. Education was rare by contemporary standards. Advancement, though narrow, was possible. Yet beneath this security lay fragility. Privilege depended entirely on obedience. Autonomy did not exist. Silence was currency. Every rule existed to prevent disruption. The harem did not tolerate unpredictability because unpredictability threatened succession, and succession threatened the state. This was the golden cage, ordered, refined, and unforgiving. It offered protection without freedom, status without ownership of self. And for those who crossed its invisible lines, the punishment would not be loud or public. It would be precise, and it would erase far more than life. In the imperial harem, rebellion did not look like shouting or open defiance. It arrived quietly, a refusal to comply, a conversation overheard, a relationship formed without permission. Power inside the palace rarely announced itself loudly, neither did resistance. Obedience in the Ottoman harem was total by design. Every movement, lesson, and interaction unfolded within a hierarchy that tolerated no ambiguity. Yet human agency persisted. Concubines formed friendships, loyalties, and rivalries. Some aligned themselves with senior women. Others attached their fortunes to rising princes. These alliances, though often informal, carried political weight. Inside a system built to control succession, even private loyalty could become dangerous. Rebellion, therefore, meant disruption of order rather than violence. It included refusal to accept reassignment, resistance to discipline, or attempts to manipulate access to power. Intrigue, real or suspected, triggered alarm. A concubine who acted independently challenged the logic of the institution. She reminded the palace that control was never absolute. The harem operated as a closed political ecosystem. It mirrored the empire in miniature, complete with factions, patronage networks, and competition for influence. Senior women supervised juniors. Eunuchs monitored movement. Every promotion altered balance. Every pregnancy shifted stakes. In such an environment, dissent did not remain personal for long. It rippled outward. What made rebellion intolerable was precedent. If one woman resisted and survived, others might follow. If discipline bent once, it could bend again. Ottoman governance relied on predictability. The palace existed to produce heirs without chaos. Any behavior that threatened that function endangered the state itself. Surveillance intensified when suspicion arose. Conversations were noted, behaviors interpreted. Silence became incriminating. A concubine under watch did not know what rule she had broken, only that attention had turned toward her. Unease spread quickly because punishment did not require certainty. It required risk. By the time rebellion was named, the threat already existed. The system did not wait for proof. It responded to possibility. Inside the harem, intent mattered less than potential impact. Authority moved preemptively because delay could not be afforded. This was the moment obedience failed, not through overt challenge, but through the perception that control might fracture. And once that perception formed, the machinery of enforcement began to turn. They did not argue, they did not explain, they did not record. The palace guards existed to ensure that disorder never became visible. At the center of this apparatus stood the black eunuchs, men whose authority derived from proximity to power and absence of lineage. They answered directly to the sultan and senior officials. Their loyalty was institutional, not personal. In a court built on secrecy, they were its most reliable instruments. Justice inside the harem did not resemble law beyond its walls. There were no trials, no written charges, no appeals. Decisions traveled downward through whispered orders. By the time guards appeared, judgment had already occurred. What remained was procedure. Punishment rarely unfolded publicly. Spectacle invited memory. The palace preferred silence. A concubine might be removed from her quarters at night, reassigned to confinement, exiled to a distant residence, or simply disappear from daily life. Other women noticed the absence. They were meant to. The guards enforced isolation as carefully as discipline. A punished woman lost access to community before she lost status. She stopped being spoken to. Her name ceased circulation. The effect was immediate. Identity dissolved through separation. This system did not seek correction. It sought deterrence. Rehabilitation implied return. The palace offered none. Once authority intervened, the goal was finality without bloodshed. Execution ended problems loudly. Erasure ended them quietly. Fear functioned best when unexplained. Uncertainty disciplined more effectively than clarity. Concubines learned not what rules had been broken, but that rules existed everywhere. Obedience became instinctive. Silence became protection. The guards themselves left no trace. Their work concluded without documentation. Chroniclers rarely mentioned them. Absence from records was not oversight. It was design. The palace erased conflict so thoroughly that later historians would struggle to name it. By morning, order returned, lessons resumed, prayers continued. Only an empty place remained, a warning without words. Inside the imperial harem, power did not shout, it removed. And that removal carried a terror deeper than death, because it taught those who remained that survival depended not on virtue, but on invisibility. Execution ends a life. The Ottoman palace understood something colder. It also ends a problem. That was precisely why death was often avoided. Inside the imperial harem, punishment aimed not at the body but at existence itself. Rebellious concubines were not always killed. Instead, they were unmade, removed from circulation, stripped of position, name, and future, while remaining alive enough to feel the loss. Confinement came first. A woman might be relocated to an isolated chamber, a distant palace, or a provincial estate attached to the imperial household. These places were not prisons in a formal sense. They lacked chains and bars. What they enforced was silence. No visitors, no correspondence, no recognition of prior rank. The concubines survived, but only biologically. Exile followed a similar logic. Women were sent away under the pretense of reassignment or protection. Once gone, they vanished from palace memory. Court registers ceased to mention them. Household lists closed ranks. To the institution, they no longer existed. This disappearance was deliberate. Execution created martyrs, witnesses, and stories. Erasure created uncertainty. The palace preferred ambiguity. A woman who died could be mourned. A woman who vanished left nothing to hold. Survival without identity was the punishment. Concubines defined themselves through proximity to power. Education, status, and advancement depended on recognition. Removal severed all three. A woman could live decades after punishment, yet never re-enter history. No marriage, no children of Khan. Sequence, no acknowledgement. The future ended while breath continued. Why not kill them? Because execution resolved rebellion once. Erasure resolved it permanently. A dead concubine might inspire sympathy. A vanished one inspired fear. The harem learned that defiance did not end in death. It ended in oblivion. That knowledge disciplined more effectively than bloodshed. Records confirm the pattern through absence. Names appear, then stop. Careers advance, then dissolve. Chroniclers describe transfers without detail. The silence is consistent. It is systematic. It is policy. For the women who remained, the message was unmistakable. The palace could remove not only your body but your meaning. Your prayers would go unanswered. Your education would become useless. Your existence would continue, stripped of all that made it worth remembering. This was punishment calibrated for an institution obsessed with continuity. It destroyed lineage, ambition, and voice without disturbing surface order. The palace remained serene, the hierarchy intact. Only the individual disappeared. Comprehension arrived slowly, because horror did not announce itself. Inside the harem, death was not the ultimate threat. Being erased was. Punishment inside the imperial harem was never private, even when unseen. Every disappearance carried meaning. Every absence became instruction. The palace did not need spectacle to govern through fear. It relied on circulation. Women talked. Eunuchs listened. Silence spread faster than explanation. A punished concubine did not return. Her bed remained empty. Her duties reassigned. Her name avoided. No announcement followed. No justification offered. That absence became a lesson repeated quietly, reinforced through uncertainty. Fear functioned best without clarity. Women did not know which action had crossed the line. They learned only that lines existed everywhere. A glance held too long, a conversation overheard, a refusal interpreted. Obedience became instinctive, not reasoned. This was governance by example without visibility. The palace avoided public violence precisely because it invited resistance. Bloodshed demanded response. Erasure demanded compliance. The lesson extended beyond individuals. Senior women tightened discipline. Alliances dissolved. Ambition recalibrated. Survival depended on invisibility. The safest concubine was the least remembered. Guards did not need to intervene often. Their infrequent appearance amplified fear. When authority moved rarely, it moved absolutely. The memory of one removal disciplined dozens. This system proved devastatingly effective. The harem remained stable for centuries despite proximity to the most dangerous political space in the empire: succession. Rebellions were rare not because women lacked will, but because resistance carried consequences worse than death. Invisible terror replaced overt force. The palace cultivated obedience through predictability. Loyalty was rewarded, silence protected, curiosity endangered. Every woman understood that survival required alignment, not aspiration. The lesson reached beyond the harem. It reinforced Ottoman governance more broadly. Power did not need to shout. It needed to endure. Institutions outlasted individuals. Memory could be managed. Identity could be withdrawn. Those who vanished left no graves, no rituals, no stories preserved by official record. Their punishment succeeded because it erased its own evidence. By the time a concubine learned the rules fully, it was too late to test them. Submission arrived before defiance could form. Silence became strategy. This was the point of no return. Once fear became internalized, enforcement faded into the background. The palace governed itself through anticipation. Authority no longer needed presence. The harem survived not through harmony, but through terror refined into routine. The lesson the palace wanted learned was simple, and it endured. You could live, but only if you disappeared when told. By design, the Ottoman palace did not remember its dead. It forgot its living. The women who vanished after punishment did not leave traces. Their absence was not recorded as tragedy, crime, or injustice. It appeared as administrative neatness. A name ceased to recur. A stipend ended. A room reassigned. The institution moved forward without rupture, precisely as intended. This was not neglect, it was policy. Court memory functioned selectively. Victories were chronicled, successions documented, loyal service preserved. Punishment, when it involved erasure, dissolved into silence. The palace cultivated an official past scrubbed of instability. Rebellious concubines threatened that narrative. Forgetting them protected it. The result was a court culture built on absence. Women who had once been visible, educated, ranked, recognized, were removed so completely that even rumor faded. Without names, stories could not circulate. Without stories, mourning could not begin. Loss became abstract, unacknowledged, and therefore unchallenged. This absence reshaped behavior long after punishment ended. The harem learned to regulate itself. Senior women discouraged ambition. Factional alignment softened. Potential rivals avoided visibility. Silence became virtue. In a system where memory could be revoked, self-erasure felt safer than prominence. Stability emerged from disappearance. Politically, the palace benefited. Succession crises remained violent elsewhere in the empire, but within the harem, dissent rarely crystallized into open defiance. Women understood that rebellion did not produce confrontation. It produced removal without drama, without witnesses, without legacy. This made resistance irrational. Culturally, the cost was profound. The harem ceased to generate remembered figures except for those who succeeded spectacularly, mothers of sultans, architects of dynastic survival. All others existed conditionally. Their lives mattered only so long as they aligned perfectly with institutional expectations. The silence reshaped historical record itself. Ottoman chroniclers wrote expansively about battles, treaties, and male elites. The internal life of the harem appeared only when it served state narratives. The missing women did not appear as victims because victimhood implied acknowledgement. Erasure avoided that risk. What remained was a palace that functioned smoothly while hollowing itself of human continuity. Generations passed through identical patterns, unaware of predecessors who had failed. There were no cautionary biographies, no recorded lessons, only unspoken rules reinforced through dread. Loss became normalized. The emptiness was not emotional alone. It was archival. Modern historians encounter sudden gaps, careers that stop mid-sentence, figures who vanish without explanation. These absences are not accidental. They are evidence. A palace that remembered nothing could not be held accountable by its own past. The system endured because it left no scars visible enough to inflame opposition. There were no executions to protest, no bodies to bury, no anniversaries of injustice. Violence dissolved into administration. This was governance optimized for longevity. Yet the cost was cumulative. A political institution that erases its members erodes its own humanity. Order remains, but meaning thins. Stability persists, but memory dies. By the time reform arrived in the 19th century, the silence had already done its work. The women lost to erasure had no advocates, no records, no stories to recover. They survived only as gaps, proof that something had been removed. The palace did not collapse because of this system. It endured. And in enduring, it perfected forgetting. Modern historians now recognize what earlier generations overlooked. The punishment of rebellious concubines was not cruelty in excess. It was violence in its most efficient form. Compared with executions, torture, or public spectacle, erasure appears restrained. It leaves no corpses. It avoids outrage. It preserves institutional dignity. That is precisely why it endured. Structural punishment outlives physical force. Across empires, similar systems appear: exile in Imperial China, convent confinement in early modern Europe, enforced disappearance under modern regimes. The Ottoman palace did not invent erasure. It refined it. Gender, enclosure, and absolute authority allowed the system to operate with extraordinary precision. What made this violence effective was invisibility. Without blood, there were no martyrs. Without records, there were no claims. Without memory, there was no resistance. The women punished in this way were not forgotten by accident. They were erased by design. This reframes how power should be understood. Violence does not always announce itself through screams or fire. Sometimes it arrives as silence, paperwork, and absence. Sometimes survival itself becomes the punishment. For women whose identity depended on recognition, removal from memory destroyed everything that mattered. Life continued, stripped of meaning, lineage, and future. Execution would have ended suffering. Erasure prolonged it indefinitely. The Ottoman palace demonstrates a hard truth about institutions. The most durable systems are those that eliminate opposition without appearing violent. They rule not through fear alone, but through the management of memory. Understanding this matters beyond history. It forces recognition that power often hides its sharpest edges behind order and calm. That silence can be a weapon. That what is missing from records may be as significant as what remains. The concubines who vanished left no graves to visit, no names to recite, no stories officially preserved. Yet their absence endures as testimony. Execution ends a life. Erasure ends history. And that is why it was worse than death.